The banking crisis is back ahead of their earnings as supply chain shock shipping rates surge again. Is this never going to end? Are we in a banking crisis again? Do you think Bitcoin going up has nothing to do with people losing trust with the banks? How do we have another supply chain disruption again? Come on, man. Our main story today is that a major bank is severely insolvent, indicating the global banking crisis is back and in a huge way. I'm going to show you what this bank is and what drove them into insolvency ahead of banks' earnings, and why it means that banks all around the world are also insolvent, putting us on the edge of the next major global financial crisis, plus seeing panic at the highest levels of the White House. And with the election looming in November, we're going to show you why they're so worried. What do you think Biden is worried about? Let me know in the comment section below what you think. You are about to find out why Alibaba stock is keep on dropping lower and why Chinese stock still keeps on falling, giving you a perfect opportunity to buy for cheap. Today's story is with this headline: Troubled China Shadow Bank Chongqing files for bankruptcy. And this is a big deal. It's like the Lehman Brothers moment of China, because this one of the biggest investment banks in China, and it's telling us that there are severe problems in the global banking system. Now we talk about a currency shortage, and this is just another evidence of what's going on around the world, because when banks go insolvent, it means we have a global shortage of not just dollars, but could be, in this case, in Chinese yuan as well. Let's talk about what drove them into insolvency and why that means that the banks all around the world are in the same position, threatening to trigger what could be the next global financial crisis. Jingle said it obviously lacked the ability to repay its debt, which is an understatement, giving well at insolvent and now filing bankruptcy. An audit found Zhang's debt were as much as 460 billion yuan, compared with assets of 200 billion yuan. Now, how does this happen? How does a bank get so upside down? Well, it's simple. Because when we take a look at a similar situation, remember Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank. With those regional banks here in the US, what happened is all of these banks bought a whole bunch of long duration bonds. We call them long bonds, at really low interest rates. They had no choice. Governments were issuing debt like crazy. Banks were forced to buy them, and then they did. And what happened then is central bankers drove interest rates up to sky high levels compared to past cycles. And what that meant is all of these assets that the banks are sitting on are now deeply upside down. So anything that goes wrong at the banking level indicates that, well, they have no position to sell assets to stop a bank run or an insolvency phase or anything of that nature, which means Jingle is not only majorly insolvent as they head into bankruptcy, but it indicates that banks all around the world are facing the same situation, which anything that could push all of them on the brink of bankruptcy. And every central banker drops rates to zero at the fastest rate you've ever seen in history. The downfall marks one of China's biggest ever bankruptcies, putting more stress on the already fragile consumer and investor sentiment. The property slump, weak domestic demand, and sluggish trade are all weighing on the economy. While its benchmark Hang Seng stock index has plunged 3 years in a row talking about an opportunity. Well, could be in the Chinese stock market with Alibaba, stock ticker BABA. The Zhang filing came just months after lending giant first triggered concerns in the financial markets, when one of its trust company's affiliates failed to repay customers on high-yield investment products. And this is again where things start, is we go back to what this bank was investing in, and you start to see how the dominoes fall. And next thing you know, you find out your entire banking system is insolvent. And so it starts to make sense. Why is Beijing trying to prop up the property market? Why are they injecting stimulus into the banks to force them to lend? Why are they talking about forcing the banks to run unsecured loans? Because it's not just the property developers, it all has knock-on effects across the financial industry. And when one bank goes, well, next thing you know, panic is going to set in. And consumers are going to yank money like crazy, which could trigger a massive deposit flight, just like we saw in the US. And while the firm's creditors are mostly wealthy individuals, rather than financial institutions, because it affects the wealthy, and it does in a big way, because it direct impact on the financial system. The collapse exposes potential cracks in the 2.9 trillion trust sector. The failure also highlights the risk of rapidly growing global private debit credit market, where the lack of public disclosure on debts raised outside the banking system is one of its defining traits. So now you can imagine wealthy investors are going to be looking at their bank, looking at their investments, and thinking, well, you know what, maybe it's time to pull those out. And of course, that's one of the worst things that could happen, because all of these banks are forced to sell their illiquid assets, because all of a sudden investors are going fleeing. Well, you're going to see a wave of insolvencies and a wave of bankruptcies hit the Chinese banking system. That's going to then pass through the rest of the world, driving central bankers to get back to zero, to get these assets out of negative equity into the plus. And in recent years, even as rival trusts paired risks, Zhang and its affiliates, Zhang International extended financing to troubled developers. So here we see it, and snapped up assets from companies including China Evergrande. China's housing market continues to flounder, despite a slew of incentives from Beijing. How do you like that, Ted? Oh, wow, Ted says, oh my goodness. Snapped up asset companies from including China Evergrande. You think that's good, Ted? Oh, Ted's saying no. He's shaking his head. To revive sales, which have now dropped in 20 of the last 24 months. So here you see the case. These banks went out and bought a bunch of bad assets from these property developers that are hemorrhaging. As a real estate market collapses, and I said in 2022, it would eventually hit the banking sector. Oh no, Ted says that's a bad thing, that it's hitting the banking sector. I think you're right, Ted. It's not good. No, it's not. Ted's saying no. Zhang is now the first of those banks to go down. Oh, Ted is saying this is bad. He's saying it's bad. Oh no, Ted. Oh no. He only covers his eyes if it's bad news. We're going to see more of them unless Beijing steps in a big way, which tells us that the likely path from the PBOC is to see rate cuts in a big way. So now you can see this is just starting to flow downhill, creating more and more problems in the Chinese financial system. Oh no, Ted is crying. He's saying that the Chinese financial system is on the brink of a collapse and it's collapsing badly. Oh, Ted, don't cry. It's okay. And more problems in the Chinese financial system and banking sector, which suggests the People's Bank of China is going to have to do what most people at this point would consider the unthinkable. And that is now China markets are heading south on further PBOC easing this year. Of course, what we know is when central banks ease, that could send stock prices like Alibaba higher. Look at BABA stock. It is at a 3-year low. How do you know this is a huge opportunity that you could take advantage of? Look at this. We're down here last time, as you see here. This took off in a huge way, suggesting that if the PBOC cut rates, BABA stock could be a major beneficiary. For most of 2023, we've seen total compensation in the form of average hourly earnings multiplied by weekly average of production of non-supervisory employees that's shown on year-over-year rate change, beating inflation that's shown in blue. But too little too late, because we know for 2 years we see consumers were way behind and they have to play catch up. They've got a ton of debt. They're carrying a bunch of that now from the holiday season as well. Tells us consumers need to see inflation come down in a big way. But the problem is it may not, and even worse, and now may start to impact the labor market as Red Sea attack brings risk of higher prices for Americans, is according to Biden officials. They're getting worried, as I worry about the geopolitical space. From Ms. Young, Director of Office of Management and Budget, she said, the Red Sea attacks, shipping, all of these things in geopolitical space certainly have the chance and opportunity to raise prices on the American consumer. And this would not look good for President Joe Biden as he heads into the election in November. Because remember, we know these things show up in the CPI with a lag. So this is a big problem that he needs to deal with today before it gets out of hand. Young is the latest U.S. official to highlight worries about the ripple effects of a wave of missile and drone strikes on ships in the Red Sea. President Joe Biden's allies are acutely concerned about what that could mean for the White House's efforts to curb inflation ahead of November election. So do you think Biden can solve whatever problems are showing up? Let me know in the comment section below. Can Biden get the shipping lane back open and get the supply chain around the world moving again? Let me know your opinion, because shipping shows signs of panic as Houthis menace key trade lane. Container shipping is set to face a crunch ahead of the Lunar New Year diversions as a result of the attacks are forcing ships to sail thousands of miles further than normal and are therefore restricting the amount of vessels able to carry goods. There is something of a panic in China now about the availability of capacity. The cost for vessels on any tanker route involving the Red Sea are red hot. Guess what happens with the CPI next?
Subscribe, like, turn on those notifications.